were pushed to become more emotional, which is really the business model anyway, right? It plays with our amygdala. And then here's fast forward to 2018, a report done by MIT, which said that essentially lies will spread faster than facts on social media. They did the study on Twitter, but it was like a lie is tweeted 70% more than a fact. On Facebook, which is where the Philippines, 100% of Filipinos on the internet are on Facebook. Facebook is our internet, just like in Myanmar, where a genocide happened. And in countries like ours, our institutions collapsed. And this became like it's like our nerves, but it's full of toxic sludge. It's full of poison. And yeah, this is part of the reason I could go to jail for the rest of my life. So, sorry.
No, thank you for raising so many of those issues and understanding around, one, why we need journalism to surface some of these issues, but also why we might need journalism in the room to begin with, to help us understand these very human activity and how they might translate to a tech world. And like you said, when we build tech, every decision we make, from the database we have to hold gender and race to who gets to see what news, these are all very political or very human decisions, and it might hide behind some AI or tech. But these are decisions we're all making day to day, so that's a call out to all the fellow builders out there. These are decisions that we make every day, so thank you for sharing that and bringing those two pieces together. Which leads to, Raney, we saw a clip from Frontline where Maria very briefly in 2 minutes talked about the effects of social media and how people share information, and you and your team brought that to light with this documentary you made, 1,000 Cuts, in such a masterful way with so many pieces I think will stick with many of us for a long time. How, in your process coming up and producing that film, how did you make decisions on what to show, what parts would influence what aspects of the world and which types of audiences, and then more importantly, how to even distribute a film like that to get to the audience that it needs to get to?
You asked the biggest questions. I have to hand it to you. You asked like the whole scope of the question.
We only have 25 minutes,
oh
so we gotta get it all in with these like brilliant minds sitting here.
And I could honestly listen to Maria the whole 25 minutes, so I'll be brief. But actually, Ramona Diaz is the director of this film. She is an incredible filmmaker, first and foremost, and I'm a big admirer of her work. And she was in the Philippines, and she captured this amazing moment with Maria, which you see in 1,000 Cuts, which I found really, really persuasive about it. And it was premiered at Sundance, and then we acquired the film, which is very unusual for Frontline. We usually commission films at the beginning. I literally had 20 to 30 people in the audience at Sundance texting me because I wasn't there. Frontline has to take this film on. And so I made an argument actually to Ramona that Frontline was the right home for this film because I knew Maria's work. She had been in our Facebook Dilemma film earlier. She was the first person to explain to me the power of these social platforms and what they could do in the Philippines, also in Myanmar, and we put that out on the air. It really affected how I also saw social media and what we did at Frontline, and it had a profound effect on me, learning what was happening in the Philippines. So when there was this great film that had literally followed Maria from the moment she was arrested until you can actually seeing is believing in this film, right? You start to understand the gravity of what a dictatorship can do to a journalist, but also to all of the young journalists around her, which I have to say were as inspiring as, truly inspiring people, right? Because they're on the front lines of this, really doing the work day in and day out. So we came on board. We decided a big Frontline broadcast, and Ramona was kind enough to go along with us on this. And it had a really good broadcast in America, but there was one problem. It couldn't be seen in the Philippines. So back to your distribution question, which is I think what you were getting at. We were thinking hard about that because no television distributors or broadcasters in the Philippines would take this film on. And the international distributor, I'll tell you, she tried. She called literally everyone. No one would air the film. And it was late one night. We were agonizing over this. And I just said, well, why don't we just put it on YouTube? Because Frontline has a huge YouTube channel. You know, I mean, huge in public media terms, okay? I'm not like a media star here. But, you know, because I have a 15-year-old son who keeps me in check, okay? However, we have a pretty good YouTube following, right? And by the way, Maria and Arjun know each other, so she gets it. But we ended up being able to release it in the Philippines, which was one of the most meaningful moments for Ramona. And also, I hope for you, Maria, because the Filipino people really needed to be able to see what was happening, you know, this concept of 1,000 cuts. So it was epiphanal in a funny way, that you can use these platforms also to amplify your work, right? This is something that is the tension in the room here, right? We use YouTube, right, in a sense. Millions of people, additional people could see it. We didn't have to go through the traditional ways of airing it, which were not working, by the way, because it, you know, the ecosystem, let's just say, for independent journalism in the Philippines was broken. So there's the conundrum.
Yeah, and like you said, you have this platform where you can reach millions of people to air your work. It's also a platform for anyone to reach millions
100%.
of people to air your a quick follow-up to everything you just said, as well with distribution and how content gets where. So a lot of the Kennedy School students, and maybe others in the audience too, include public policy people, public policy students, some journalism, law, etc., who may have the ability to influence some of these channels. So how do you think about how these stories get out in a meaningful way, and how they get to, from all your experience, the people that they have to get to, whether they're lawmakers, policymakers, anyone who is neither of those but just perhaps reads news on Facebook? How do you think about getting stories to people so that they matter?
Well, I'll start, but I'd love to hear what you think about this, because her work is really profound in this way, and I think she has some new ideas, but we're basically a big television broadcaster that now streams immediately. The good news about Frontline is we're in front of the paywall, so I'm in that special position of you don't have to subscribe, you don't have to pay for us, so we have a huge audience as a consequence. On YouTube, we do not air our films on Facebook, by the way, and there's a lot of reasons for that. On YouTube, we've been working with YouTube. We're very careful with what we put there, and we have guardrails, and we monitor the commenting, and I'll tell you, that's a really big job. And to be honest with you, we have decided on the YouTube platform, the upside for younger people who do not come to us on PBS to see our work, the upside is bigger than the downside of them just purely not seeing our work. But this is something we literally wrestle with daily.
Yeah, so right now, unless you are much older than most of us in my age or older, the shared reality is broken, right? Because part of it is because of the way I think the tech has also splintered. So if you watch CNN, do you watch Fox? If you watch, right? So there's this polarization that happened, not just because of what the journalists do, but because there's a nervous system that's running underneath. How do you, I guess the quick answer to that is, Rappler, when we started in 2012, we were born on Facebook, the very same, and we're still fact-checking partners. We're only one of 2 Filipino fact-checking partners of Facebook. And we continue to work with Facebook because there is no option, right? I wish, like many people who say, let's just delete. You cannot delete Facebook if you live in the Philippines, because 100%. This is the 6th year in a row that Filipinos spend the most time on social media globally. 6 years. So think about the Philippines as if you do genetics, how you experiment on fruit flies because there's so many lifetimes in a day, in a few days. That's kind of like the Philippines, right? So you can experiment, and that's where many digital products, starting with Yahoo, are tested in our market for you here in the United States. So it's a hop, skip, and a jump to having the information operations tested in our country. And you'll see in the film that if it works in the Philippines, then this is what the Cambridge Analytica whistleblower said. He said they will port it over to you. Because in the end, you Americans are the target. We were just the guinea pigs, you know. All right, so distribution. So given all of this, right, we still are distributed on Facebook. We are on YouTube, social media. If you're a digital player like we are, we're purely digital. You cannot give up on this. And yet I know that it is biased against the news, right? What else are we doing? Okay, so here's the fun part. We should have rolled out our own tech platform in 2017, right? But in 2016, when Rappler came under attack, the money that we had to build that platform went to pay our legal fees, right? So then we had no money to do it. But imagine tech in the hands of journalists. And so what we did is we learned in 2019 how to shift our culture using agile development, which is a very different way of thinking for journalists.
Here, Ressa just said agile development in our panel discussion, so I just want to take a moment to acknowledge how exciting that is.
It's really different, right? So tonight at 1 a.m., 1 p.m. in Manila, our rollout of our new platform, which will, our elevator pitch when I was raising money for our seed round in 2011 is that we build communities of action. The food we feed our communities is journalism, right? What's the end goal of this? Is civic engagement, strengthening democracy, giving the NGOs, the CSOs, the information they need so they can help government. Actually, you got to put them all in there. So tonight until tomorrow, and then we'll see if it works. Fingers crossed. I wish Kathy had looked at our code. No, but it is rolling out tonight. So guys, if you're watching from Manila, I hope it goes well.
Congrats on the rollout. There's a thread I'm going to pull on next with government, but right before I get to it, you made me think of a term in Virginia Eubank's Automating Inequality book for rights poor, and how oftentimes some ideas or tech are tested out on what these organizations, whether they admit them or not, on these rights poor regions that they consider just have different rights in their own communities and test it out. And some parts of her argument is you may not care about these issues, but it may start there. And like you said with the fruit fly, it will now perhaps propagate where you are as well. So thank you for sharing that. So you mentioned government a bit. We talked about the complex relationship with tech, and let's get to that as well. So with government, on one hand, there's their role to enforce and regulate and hopefully try to make this better in journalism and tech. On the other hand, sometimes, as we've seen, government is also part of the problem, and it's like, which part of government are we talking about, and which government around the world even has influence on which regions around the world. And so, again, probably another big question. How do you think about the role of government here? And if so, even just which governments and their roles as well? And perhaps, Maria, will start with you, but Raney, I'm sure you have thoughts as well.
I think Raney will be I will blame the U.S. because these are American companies, you know, and they have essentially exported something to countries that have institutions that are significantly weaker, and what you can weather in the United States, we can't. And that's what you've seen in the global south, right? Increased violence. There are at least 81 countries around the world. This is from Oxford University's Computational Propaganda Research Project, where they said, January this year, that 81 countries around the world have social media, cheap armies on social media rolling back democracy. 81 countries, right? And I watched that from 2017, it was only 27, then it doubled, and it's gone on. So I think part of it is, I think about it like this. And you can get lost because you have a very expensive lobbying machinery. But, you know, you have a better business bureau. You are users of something. It's almost like giving you a drug and not having tested it beforehand and then leaving you on your own. This is more potent than a drug. This is your mind. This is the way you look at the world. And I think most Americans think about this as misinformation, right? Like someone's just being mean. That's not it. You guys were targeted by information operations. This is part of, it's a tactic of war. And you are significantly weaker. And consequently, democracies all around the world feel that ripple effect. So I think the United States needs to take action against American companies that have been allowed, like the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, that have been allowed to do things overseas that frankly your country, I guess my country as well, but I guess we all don't. How do you protect your kids? How do you protect your kids, right? So anyway, yeah, that's the first. But again, obviously, you're still slow. You're getting out at the gate. But the EU has the Democracy Action Plan. They have the Digital Services Act. It is the most sophisticated of the laws out there now, but it still has some problematic parts. But legislation, sorry.
Legislation is one lever. Yes.
Yeah, I think it's also Congress people being more sophisticated about tech and less enamored. I think there is a steep learning curve that they had a number of years ago, and just knowing from conversations that we've had that a lot of journalists were ahead. We were also behind, frankly, right? But I think we've talked about this, Maria and I. American journalism has to be more sophisticated about tech. We need to understand it better. We need to not be as enamored. And I think there was a whole moment in time that shifted really with the elections that have happened here too. So we saw a lot of our own disruption of our democracy. And I think that's going to lead to likely changes. And we'll keep following it. I mean, we looked at 230, which everyone knows about 230, I'm assuming. The protection of these platforms to be able to not be liable, essentially, for what they publish. And I think the question is really going to center around that, and what happens is the future Congress people to figure out with a very strong lobby behind them. So,
pushing on that a little bit more, you mentioned legislation, 230, Congress. You also mentioned the Better Business Bureau and other safeguards, more or less. So regulation can also be a double-edged sword sometimes, right? And it also depends on where one might stand upon where the regulation falls as well. So how do you think governments, not just governments, but the citizens who are on the end of that regulation, or not, even if it's not regulation, it might be an executive order from a president or a prime minister or something. There's lots of different ways things become policy or laws. How do you think about that ecosystem?
I'm not going to have an opinion about that, because that's a really loaded question, actually, for journalists. But I will say that I think that it's a perfect storm for journalism right now. And I think journalists are being hit by all sides, right? I do think the Trump administration, calling journalists the enemy at all points in time, and Maria and I have talked a lot about this, right? Really pigeonholing us, and having this adversarial relationship didn't help journalism get stronger, unfortunately. I also think if you look at the local level, the absolute gutting of a business model at the local level means that local journalism is really a shadow of itself. So accountability, investigative journalism, expensive. There's no really great business model for it. And so we're at a crisis point in journalism. So we're not at our strongest. And I think that, coupled with the fact that the social platforms are so strong, that is a perfect storm for us to navigate in the next number of years. And journalism needs to survive. I mean, that's one thing we do advocate for at Frontline, and people like Maria. That is clearly what we believe. We believe journalists have to be in the room, right? We have to be the ones asking these accountability questions. We have to be independent. We have to be making decisions on our own about what's right editorially, and not be, pushed into anything in terms of people's agendas.
Thanks for just also so clearly articulating even the dynamic of the strength of journalism paired with the strength of tech, and how those have built on each other in a particular way in the ecosystem that maybe in a different time, but the strengths were different, it might be a different time as well.
So I'll just add, right, and this is more academic, and you can also put it to the fact that I'm not an American journalist. I mean, I don't practice here. So there are 4 levers that we could use, and this is from The Hype Machine by Sina Noral: money, code, norms, and laws. Right? So laws, we talked about it. Section 230 is the easiest one right now, if you think about it, right? It protects social media platforms. It protects tech by treating them like pipes or like the telephone. And yet, the algorithms of distribution are also algorithms of bias, and they're algorithms of manipulation, because by design, imagine again, I go back to if anger is weighted 5 times more, this is not pipelines. These are not neutral pipelines that anyone will get. So that's the first, the laws. I think on the money, so surveillance capitalism, Harvard emeritus professor Shoshana Zuboff wrote a 750-page book. We can summarize it in like 2 sentences. The business model is bad. The business model is it's extractive. It uses your atomized data, and then it builds a model of you that is then sold. You get rid of privacy. You get rid of, I mean, it's like the Minority Report in real time now. That's how, Kathy, our tech person will tell us that, right? I mean, it is insidious. It can be. That's where information operations step in. It can be insidious manipulation of our minds. A money code, if you have a building code, why don't you have a building code for the tech that infiltrates our minds, right? Why is no one accountable? Why are we all throwing our hands up in the air like, oh gosh, while the violence continues? Money code norms. Norms. This is the first time in a while that I've been back in the United States, but the division in the United States is shocking. Shocking. And we have seen these divisions on Twitter maps beginning in the 2009 elections. If you look at it, if you pull down the hashtag GOP, you will pull down 2 round circles of tweets with a little bridge between them. If you pull down hashtag GOP, you will pull down the Democratic parts also, right? It used to be. It is far more. And this is what I've lived through in the Philippines: money code, norms, and laws. So I think I think you need to move it away from politics, and you just need to push it to safety, right? Lush so decided that they would drop out of all social media because their users couldn't be safe in social media. So again, it goes back to power and money.
You mentioned power, money, code, norms, and then you and I actually, we had briefly discussed how some of these issues have existed for decades or centuries, and how it's not to be taken lightly or ignored that the medium of software and code changes everything, is how fast people can deploy something out there into the world. So, we had mentioned, building a new car or a cigarette and just throwing out mass produce, probably can't do overnight. But building a new social media platform, a ton of people might not use it, but you can easily have it up overnight. And so from your experience, how have you seen that fast speed of tech deployment really just affect journalism in different ways?
I mean, I'll quickly move fast, break things. It's broken. Democracy, our shared reality, journalism, because we're distributed on these platforms that prioritize, that we all know facts are boring, right? But journalists know that you will not pay attention until you need us, and we take that as a given, right? It's like going to the gym, right? We keep getting stronger, so when you actually pay attention, we're the best we can be. We don't see that trade-off in tech, right?
I mean, people like Maria give me faith, right, and optimism that they're actually trying to build an alternate platform, and she did try to explain it to me. Truth be told, I'm not one of you all. But I did actually understand the ethos behind it. And I do think that the more awareness that we do raise, I know that sounds Pollyanna, but I do think the recent reporting on girls on Instagram, I'll just say as a mother of a 12-year-old girl, I finally felt like other mothers woke up. I'm like, where have you been? I'm like, I've been saying this, like trying to keep my own kids off these social platforms, but it's like I'm talking into the winds. But this really tended to wake people up, like journalism. We're there when you actually need us, but hopefully we'll still be there, frankly. But the point is, I do think awareness is growing. I'm sure you're seeing this within your own circles. People are starting to talk about this more. But that doesn't mean change, right, if you don't have those 4 issues that Maria just rose.
All right, one more question to pull on that thread, and then for anyone in person, if you have a question, think about it, and please step up to the mic in about maybe 5 minutes or so. And I think we're also collecting some online questions as well. So to your point of these levers for change, and they come back to these stories that people tell, either on a compelling platform or in a compelling way, in some way that, or at the right time, all these things put together. And you mentioned you saw the film at Sundance, and like, this is something that we must highlight and showcase. And so from your experiences in this space, going back to these different places that have power, whether it's a government or academia or tech companies, how do you either know or think about, or what's your thought process for coming up with what are the stories you tell, and how do you tell them, and how do you, like, what is your decision making or thought process for thinking through all of that? Because you both have done it very effectively.
I mean, I love a big investigative documentary, and that's just what I tend to like, and that's what Frontline does best. So we've investigated Duterte in other regards, right? We've been looking at the Philippines now for years. So we were positioned to understand what the Philippines didn't just mean for the Philippines, but for the world, and frankly to the United States by the time Ramona Diaz's amazing film came along. We were a series that had been taking the Philippines issues really seriously, right? And I think that we also looked at, you know, Russia with the same lens. We've looked at Putin multiple times, and Saudi Arabia, right? I like doing films that are investigative about people in power, companies in power. We just took on Amazon. You know, these are the types of stories I think Frontline's well positioned to tell, because we're in a really special spot. We're nonprofit. We don't have funders who are telling us not to. So I always say to my staff, we're only as good as we are, right? Nobody's stopping us from doing this important journalism, so we might as well go do it. We have the skill set to do it. That's the other thing, you know, we're all trained journalists, which we don't take for granted.
What gives me so much hope also as I hear you talk is, we talked briefly about the speed of tech, but also, I mean, journalism, there's speed there too of getting to stories and things like that, and how in many ways this was a movement that was built over time, where you were prepared to take on this film because of just past years of work in this space. And when this film came along, you were ready to really launch it.
Yeah, I would say, like, I do think Rappler and Frontline are different in that regard. Like, we make big documentary films, right? So we take a long time to do this, but I do think, like, we can amplify each other. But I do think there's a space for long-form documentary, and younger people love documentaries. And I think they love them because they're looking for depth and breadth, right? Because they're just hit with so much stuff daily, every single minute. Maybe it's time to sit back and watch a documentary about Maria Ressa, who might become your hero. And then you might, as she's mine, right? Then you know it. And come on, right, thank you, right? Like, how could you not be our hero? But anyway. You know, that's the point, right? You might see someone that you identify with, or you aspire to, or you think, like, okay, that person is changing the world, but you need time to tell their narrative. I mean, that's why 1,000 Cuts is so phenomenal. You watch it all happen, you know?
Thank you. And Maria?
We wind up, so I think in 3 different things, right? So we've wound up doing a lot more accountability journalism, investigative journalism. When we did the investigation looking at information operations and how the government was using social media, I actually ran that by our board, because I didn't know what would happen, but I knew that it would threaten the business. And so that's the other part, right? I run the business and tech of Rappler. I no longer run the editorial side. Rightfully so, because when I became the news topic, right? How can I pretend that my government's not trying to jail me, right? How can I interview somebody from government and, you know, not know this? So I am not on the editorial side anymore. But the mix of Rappler is we still try to bring you in. I always talk about the sugar. You like entertainment. In the Philippines, when I handled the top newscast, it was always crime and entertainment. That's the sugar. But because we're journalists, we know that we can't just feed you crime and entertainment, because God forbid our world becomes nothing against entertainment, guys. We all need it. But we wanted to give you the issues, and we did, and we spent money on it. And that's the other part. The news process is expensive. It is, and it isn't just one reporter on Substack or on whatever blog. It is the process of journalism that keeps it objective, that gives you the gatekeeping role. That's why Frontline is complex, right? It gives you the complexity of the world. I think the last part is now, how do we, I'm focused on tech. That's why I saw Kathy very early on. I really believe that, creating content, and no offense to journalists, we gotta fix the distribution problem. Because while we're making editorial decisions to give you content, they're not reaching you if you're on these platforms. And so until we fix that, then every content we create, no matter how great it is, and I hate to call journalism just content, journalism, which takes courage to hold power to account, right? Because when you ask those tough questions, you can get slapped. And you still do it because that's the job you have. So that now, to me, takes second. I focus on how we can get you, how we can get rid of this toxic sludge, more her stuff. That's why, but this is what your world is going to be. They're intertwined. And we need to now get it to a place where it isn't harmful to us, where it doesn't encourage the worst of human nature, where it doesn't let us, where it kills empathy and everything that makes human beings wonderful, right? That allows us to have societies that work.
Thank you. I feel like every time I'm around you, I feel this intense call to action to do so many things. So I know I mentioned that was the last question, but I do want to wrap with, are there other, I think a lot of what I'll hear from the Kennedy School audience too is, well, what do I do? And this ranges from people who are maybe early career to folks who are back here now having spent decades in industry or in government, et cetera, just trying to figure out how to perhaps think of this from different angles. So to any extent, it could be a specific audience, could be a single type of field. So what are some things that I think individuals can do? And then we can ask questions.
Okay. I'll go individual, and then let's do, because you're at HKS, guys, right? So individually, you're on these platforms. Demand better, right? You should demand better, and we have been passive consumers of this. It's like we've just been fed drugs. I shouldn't use that in the drug war in the Philippines, but okay, scratch that, So demand better, I think, and it's not just of the platform. We got in trouble. Rappler was targeted because we demanded an end to impunity in 2016 of Rodrigo Duterte and his drug war and Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook. The impunity continues. It must stop. The second, as a person here, it means you have tremendous power. Right? So what are you going to do? Where's the legislation? Why do people think we can sit back and let this keep going the way it is? I'll tell you, our elections on May 9th will elect 18,000 positions, including our president and vice president. 35 years after the Marcoses, Ferdinand Marcos declared martial law in 1972. He was in power until 1986. So 35 years after he was ousted by people power, his son, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., is now running for president. And he is the front runner. And the only way he will win, sorry, maybe that's too political, but we have exposed networks of disinformation that are slowly chipping away at history, changing history in front of our eyes. That is happening to you here as well. So for us, it's a now. Shoshana Zuboff was saying, there's maybe a timetable that policymakers will look at, 5 years, 10 years. I think 3 months. We have elections coming up, and we will not have integrity of elections if we don't have integrity of facts. And the last part is, if we lose our elections, if we lose our democracy, do you think you will keep yours?
taking a deep breath. And Raney, do you have anything to add to that? We can open it up to the rest.
No, I mean, I just think, be a helper. That's actually something we talk a lot about, actually. Just, actually think about your life's work and your work and try to figure out how you can be part of the solution. I mean, it's as simple as that, actually, with the brightest minds out here. We're talking to you. What can you do to help the situation? Be active and push into it with us. That's really all we need, right? We need the best and brightest minds to help us solve this. Because on the journalist side, we're pretty smart. But I'll tell you, coming in right now at the stage that you all are coming in and thinking about it, we could use your help. And I say that every time I talk to people now.
Thank you to you both. All right, let's do a round of applause and then we'll open it up. All right, please step up to the mic so that our folks live streaming can hear as well. And we'll try to get to as many as possible.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Derek Flickel. I am an MPP2 here, graduating in 2022. And I'm interested to hear more about the platform you're launching tonight or this afternoon, depending on your time zone. Could you tell us a little bit more about its civic or political goals? Is it revenue positive or subsidized by another business? And if so, what are the implications of that business model for your social goals?
And I love you. Thank you for the question. My gosh. Look, I'll summarize it really quickly, and then you have to tell me whether it'll work, right? So what happened when we came under attack was that, the government tried to shut Rappler down, revoke our license to operate in January 2018. Within 4 months, we lost 49% of our advertising revenue. So we actually took what we were doing in terms of looking at networks of disinformation, understanding how we were being manipulated, the database of the Shark Tank, we call it the Shark Tank, publicly available information, which no one but Facebook had, but they're public, right? So what we did is, we created a database and we turned it into, we productized it. That's how we survived. I mean, we should have already been bankrupt. So the business model, from 2018 to 2019, it grew 2,000%. And in 2020, during the pandemic, we actually hired more people because we needed to grow. So the business model is separate, and it has nothing to do with advertising, at least the one that's there. Because advertising was flawed to begin with, and when tech took it on, it became the kind of micro-targeting that it does, and the way it uses our data, it is like it is wrong. So, because that is the manipulation. So no, that's not, so business was secondary. The goal of this platform is civic engagement. So think about it like this, right? What really escalated in speed was the spread of information, good and bad. That's another thing that's flawed in the way the platforms are set. They didn't put, if they're all ones and zeros, well, facts are more important than lies, right? Like, it doesn't matter. Freedom of speech works if your neighbor lied here, but it doesn't spread to the entire city. But if the lie spreads faster than the fact, which is where we are today, there's something fundamentally wrong. So what our platform is going to try to do is this huge spread of the quick spread didn't take civil society with it, because the way human beings process information is still at the same pace. So here's like something, a lie that spreads, it still takes hours for someone to respond in government or an NGO to respond. What we're going to try to do is shorten that time. That's what the platform will do, and how the two ways is by actually shortening the process of the CSOs, NGOs, and our government partners to that information. So the quickest way I can tell you is how we are going to do our fact-checking for the elections. It's not just fact-checking. And we've taken some lessons from the United States. It's a 4-tier fact-checking process, because unless Kathy gets Facebook to fix things really quickly, we have to think that nothing will change. So at the foundation are all the news groups that will collaborate together in fact-checking. On top of that are the civil society and NGO partners that we've had, because then that means the time for the information to get to them is real time as well. On top of that, we're adding academics. During your 2020 elections, you had something called the Election Integrity Partnership, but the academics were off on their own, and they moved at an academic time. Sorry, guys. You have to move at news time, right? So the end goal of our academic partners is that they would hopefully then be moving faster and releasing their findings faster. And then finally, on top of that, we're adding lawyers, because everything just moves too slowly. So it's with us, when it's existential the way it is, that's where we have to go. So that's what the platform will enable. Did that? In the end, I guess we were looking at impact first, and then we go to tech people who are really smart, and we go, so how do we do this? And then you realize that they're iterative. They keep trying, and it's very different from the way journalists work. Because if we did that, trying in real time, we could get sued. Can you sue Facebook? Well, lots of people now have, but anyway, long answer to your question. That's, please, I'll tell you whether it works. And if it does work, wow, then we move forward. If it doesn't work, then we go back to the drawing board.
And for the record, for all my students, past and present, we have a Nobel laureate who said impact first, and then tech, and iterate, not tech first. Thank you. Liz, will you tell me if we have a hard stop? We'll try and take as many questions as we can. Maybe we can try and do a few questions in succession, and then we'll just do a massive answer, if that's okay.
Hi, I'm Sue, MPID1 student from HKS. Thank you, Maria, for being an inspiration to journalists and I think women generally. But I think I want to ask a more personal question, because I think that role also put you in an increasingly dangerous situation. I think in the film, at one point, you had to wear a bulletproof vest in the car. So my question is, how do you deal with that increasing security issue for yourself, family, close friends, both emotionally and in your day-to-day life?
Just go ahead and answer. I feel like that's it. Yeah, let's go ahead and answer.
Hi, my name is Roqia Al-Huda. I'm an MPID 2. My question is building on what you said, on what we can do. I'd love to know if you encountered any successful initiatives, not from journalists, but more from either civil society or citizens, who managed to curb the impact of social media in promoting false information.
Thank you. And then, let's go ahead and go through the other two, and we'll have them notes down.
Hi, thank you so much for your time today, and also thank you, Professor, for sharing this in the product management class. I'm a student of yours. So my name is Dhananjay Goyal. I'm a dual degree between Wharton and the Kennedy School, doing an MBA, MPA. This is the second talk that I've attended, and I've been meaning to ask you this question for a while. But what I wanted to ask you was that you talked a lot about sort of the steps that we can take, but I wanted to talk about courage. And I wanted to talk about particularly the allied damage. So you mentioned about the steps that you can take, but like my fear, I don't know if this is echoed by people here, is about the effects to family, the effects to people around you. How do you mitigate, or how do you manage that? And then nestled within that is the concept of courage as a muscle. And do you believe that it is a muscle or it is a scale? And if so, then how do you build that?
Thank you. And then, that's such a great question.
Good evening. I'm Mohammed Haddad. I have been journalist in Tunisia for like 12 years, covering the revolution and other stuff. I am here as an MCMPA, and I can relate to all the challenges you've been talking about, but your story is not important as much as the diffusion of your story. And on that point, I wanted to ask you your opinions about the role of news agencies. So I've worked for AFP, Reuters, and they've been in that field. And the way they have been and they are selecting the news is like answering the demand, rather improving the quality of the supply, if we talk in economic terms. So till which extent are they also in a way responsible or guilty of disorienting the public? Thank you.
Thank you. And then let's do one more, and I can summarize some of the questions, and we can go from there.
I'm also an MPP student. I wanted to ask, we see that people's attention spans are really shrinking. You had a generation that read the newspaper, generation that read Facebook articles, and now generation that gets all their info from TikTok reels and like slides on Instagram. And there's no time or space to give context or explain what's going on in the world. So how do we kind of deal with that?
Thank you. So I think there had roughly 4 buckets of questions. One is around courage, dangerous situations. How do you deal with that personally, and if not just personally, but effects on families as well? And then a question around what are some of the successful initiatives? We've talked about some of the harms. What are some of the successful initiatives and what citizens can do to curb? And then the role of news agencies that are focusing on perhaps demand rather than supply. And finally, the question about attention span and how do we think about and deal with that?
Okay. Okay. Wow. Thank you for those amazing questions. Where to begin? Fear is real, of course, but like a muscle, you get used to it. It's like a new normal in a weird way. You conquer it, and actually, I do it by being smart about it. I like, and how do you be smart? I think of the very worst case scenarios, and then I prepare for it. First, myself, I imagine it, and then if it is for me alone, then I try to put in place safety measures against it, which is probably why you saw in 1,000 Cuts, right? Because the way targeted assassinations happen is by a motorcycle gunman shooting into a car stuck in traffic. How many people know traffic that doesn't move, right? So that was pre-pandemic. But for Rappler, for example, we drill worst case scenarios, and that's whole. So and imagine trying to do that in confidential channels. So that means we almost set up, I learned lessons from terrorists, cells. We set up cells, and we are prepared, and we roll it out every now and then. It's almost time to do a drill if you're watching, because you have to drill. And then you also make mistakes. One of our drills before the lockdown, we had a new social media person come in. No one told him it was a drill because it felt very real, so he turned it on our 5 million Facebook page, and people thought we were getting shut down. So we apologized. And I think that's the other part is I think journalists know that we are human, and when we make mistakes, we have a corrections page, and we tell our community we made a mistake. So that was easy. My family, it's hard. My sister, I'm 35 years a journalist, so I'm really old, and I'm used to it. And my mom used to call CNN when I was doing. It was before really the internet. Most of my reporting was before YouTube. So my mom had my satellite phone number, and CNN put a minder on her alone because she would call every time. So we kind of get used to I'm used to compartmentalizing because that's the way you get through it. The other questions, I think, I think it's a muscle, like being corrupt or not being corrupt, right? When you're offered a bribe, when you say no to that, you take a path. So for every young reporter in a country where there's endemic corruption, that first bribe is critical, because if you accept it, then you will be corrupt most of your career, the rest of your career, unless something happens. But the minute you say no, the easier it is to keep saying no, to the point that, the more you say no, the more you solidify who you are. I think that's what courage is, because you don't know, like innovation, like the word innovation, you don't know what that means really in practice. You just live your way into it. What were the other things? Successful initiatives as citizens. And this is something that we like, that we're trying now. In May this year, so as journalists, and you'll see one of the debates that Raney and I have always had when we started talking was really, where's the line between journalism and activism? When it's a battle for facts, journalism is activism, right? But even I waited very late until I embraced human rights. Because freedom of the press is easy to defend when you're a journalist, but do you defend human rights activists? And I have learned that you must, because they're the first to get targeted and killed. So in one of our partners, for example, a group called Karapatan has had 16 people killed in the 5 years, and I've just risked prison, right? So that's not, so what we've done is in May, we decided to form a human rights coalition. It started with 5, it is now at 85. And to use, you really are, human rights groups tend to have very niche communities. But when we work with them, when our civic engagement arm works, Move PH, so there's still a line between the investigative journalists and the civic engagement arm. When Move PH works with our human rights groups, they are incredible. So actually, it's a whole of society approach. You've heard military guys say whole of society or government say whole of society. What if the citizens are the ones saying that? It must be a whole of society approach. So I hope this will work. I mean, certainly it's helped lessen the killings.
I would say, watching Maria and her journey around safety, especially, hers is a very extreme case, but journalists face that all across the world. And even in the United States, a lot of journalists who were covering the Trump era, going to the rallies, you've heard those stories. And one of the things I've said now is with my journalists, the people who work for Frontline, we have a lot of the same things they go through. We've gone through Gabrielle Saunders here in the audience. She's an Eamon Fellow this year. And we do that at Frontline too. In addition to that, we learned a lot from Maria about doxing, about being attacked online. Women in particular are impacted. And we have serious privacy policies. And we work with our journalists now in a way that you just would be surprised the amount of security that we put around people, especially at Frontline when we're doing a lot of investigative reporting about the rise of hate, white supremacy, and the things that we cover. Those journalists, especially if they're visible, like Maria is, those people are attacked, and we've had death threats. But this is a particular case, right? And I think your courage is amazing. You give us strength every day to keep going as journalists, right? So.
And then to maybe wrap up on pulling it up to the institutional level, what are the roles of these different news agencies and also attention spans? I think those are likely, can bucket into one.
So I think the news agencies get a kind of bad rap because they're covering everything, right? I think if you look more closely at what the Associated Press and Reuters or others are doing, is a lot of very good, steady-headed investigative work. Some of the best global investigative work going on today is done by them. The question is, are they getting the credit for it? Because oftentimes they're published under the names of other news organizations, right? They're being held or they're carried by. But some of our best investigative journalism now is happening in collaboration with them. I wanted to just say that out loud. And of course, there's always room for improvement. Not just covering the news, but investigating the news. And, more and more we're feeling like we have to push into every single story. In terms of attention spans, my God, I feel it too, right? I think we're all it takes so much discipline to pay attention now. But I've been encouraged by documentary films being the rave of not just my generation, but younger generations. And somehow the combination of visual, narrative storytelling is still capturing people's attention. All the more reason that documentaries are fact-based and real. So that's where I spend my time thinking as a filmmaker. How do we make sure these are tough, investigative, fair, but also based in fact? Because they're seen now by millions of people.
I'll add the 2 things. I think what Raney doesn't tell you is not all news managers are like her, right? So she's really at the front. So in the Philippines, women are attacked at least 10 times more than men. And there was a point in time, maybe 2 years ago, I was sitting with top women journalists who were covering the White House under Trump. And many of them had said that they didn't bring these questions up because they were told to just toughen it up. It isn't that. This is really psychological warfare, right? It's meant to tear you down. So having Raney there for her folks are incredible. And I think hopefully that there's more. AP, Reuters, their business model is dying along with the business model of news, right? Advertising is essentially dead. Again, Raney is in a place where she can hold the light because she's Frontline is up front. They can spend the money for quality journalism. But we're seeing the evolution. We're also a Reuters client now. And we know they do good work. And we know that in many ways, all of them have shifted to digital, but they have to hold the line. Independent journalism must hold the line while we fix the tech, you know? And we can't stop doing what we're doing, right? Because and the hard part is that if you put quality journalism behind a paywall, which is where most of these news groups are being encouraged as a business model, then only the crap stays behind. And that is what we are creating for the future. I think the last part is the incentive schemes. So I'm talking to Kathy again. The incentive schemes for journalism are off, right? Wrong. Think about it. What's happened with the internet is that the very expensive news organization all of a sudden now is distilled to how are they measured for money? Page views. How are those page views ratcheted up? Social media, which prioritizes clickbait, anger, hate, fear. And that's part of the reason, remember when Facebook said that videos, they inflated a figure for video views that was 90% more than it was. But when that happened, what did news organizations do? They cut their editorial staff and hired more video, not Frontline. But right? So this is reflected in the quality of the news that you have. Don't give up yet. It's too soon. We cannot. I think journalists are, and maybe I'm biased, I am, journalists held the line, and we have to keep holding the line while Kathy fixes the tech.
All right, don't give up and hold the line. Thank you again to you both so much for being here.